the craziest ancient Rome discoveries that proved historians wrong. Welcome. Take a second and picture ancient Rome in your head. Go on. I'll wait. You're probably seeing white marble temples, toga-wearing senators in the Forum, gladiators fighting to the death in the Colosseum, and Emperor Nero fiddling while the city burns. You see legions marching in perfect formation. You see a society that was, for all its genius, incredibly predictable. We think we know Rome. We've had 2,000 years of books, paintings, movies, and video games to cement this image. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Almost everything you just imagined? It's either a lie, a massive oversimplification, or a story told by the victors that we've been too lazy to fact-check. For centuries, historians operated on a handful of texts written by wealthy Roman men who hated their own poor, despised their neighbors, and lied constantly about their military victories. And we believed them, but because we had no evidence to the contrary, until the shovel hit the dirt. Over the last 40 years, archaeology has stopped being the quiet, dusty assistant to history. It has become the angry detective who shows up with DNA evidence to a trial that ended a millennium ago. The discoveries made beneath the soil of Britain, the sewers of Constantinople, the deserts of Egypt, and the forests of Germany have done more than just add footnotes to the textbooks. They have detonated them. We are going to talk about the discoveries that made tenured professors choke on their wine. Discoveries that revealed Roman concrete was so advanced we are only now, in 2026, beginning to understand its self-healing properties. Discoveries that proved Emperor Nero didn't fiddle while Rome burned, because the fiddle didn't exist yet. Discoveries that showed Roman women were not quiet homemakers but brutal power brokers. Discoveries that proved the Romans reached the New World? Maybe. Stay with me. This is not a lecture. This is a demolition project. We are going to tear down the marble facade and show you the Rome they didn't want you to see. The Rome of graffiti artists, chemical warfare, gender fluidity, skyscrapers, and a financial crisis so bad it makes 2008 look like a parking ticket. Let's start with the biggest lie of all, the pristine white city. The Rainbow Empire, how we lied about marble. For 500 years, the Renaissance artists looked at the crumbling ruins of Rome. They saw the white marble of the Pantheon, the white marble of the Colosseum. They concluded that the ancient Romans hated color. They believed Rome was a minimalist paradise of clean lines and classical restraint. This aesthetic became the foundation of Western art. Neoclassical architecture, white statues, beige museums. They were wrong. Embarrassingly wrong. In the 1960s, a German archaeologist named Vinzenz Brinkmann had a radical idea. He looked at a Roman copy of a Greek statue, the so-called Alexander sarcophagus, and noticed the faintest traces of pigment. Not dirt. Not mineral staining. Using ultraviolet light and raking light, basically, shining harsh lamps from the side to see microscopic bumps, he proved that the entire statue was originally painted in eye-searing colors. Bright red lips, blue hair ribbons, yellow tunics, pink cheeks. When Brinkmann created painted replicas and put them next to the white originals in museums, the curators were horrified. They said it looked like a circus. They said it looked cheap. One Italian curator called it vulgar. Exactly. That's the point. The Romans loved vulgar. Let me be explicit. In 2021, using new luminescence imaging, researchers mapped the original colors of the Prima Porta Augustus, the most famous statue of Emperor Augustus. That pristine white marble statue you've seen in every textbook? His tunic was blood red. His breastplate was a kaleidoscope of blue, yellow, and green, depicting a diplomatic victory over the Parthians. His hair was auburn. His eyes were glass-paste replicas of human eyes, staring out with terrifying realism. And his skin? Terracotta. Because Roman elites used the Mediterranean sun as a status symbol. This changed everything. Suddenly, historians realized the Roman Forum wasn't a muted government plaza. It was a Las Vegas strip. The walls of Pompeii weren't faded ochre. They were psychedelic reds and electric blues. The Romans painted everything. Statues, walls, floors, even the streets in some neighborhoods. They used Egyptian blue, a pigment that literally glows under specific light because it's made of calcium, copper, and silicon, to paint the gods. Why did we get this wrong? 2 reasons. First, the paint degraded over 2,000 years. Second, when early archaeologists in the 1700s found painted statues, they scrubbed them clean because they thought the paint was dirt. They literally destroyed the evidence of Roman color because it offended their beige, Protestant sensibilities. So, correction 1, Rome was not a black and white movie. It was a technicolor fever dream. And that fact alone forces us to rethink Roman psychology. A culture that loves this much color is not the cold, logical machine of military efficiency we imagine. It was emotional, theatrical, and obsessed with spectacle. The concrete revolution that we still don't understand. We all know the Romans invented concrete, right? That's History 101. They mixed volcanic ash, lime, and seawater to build the Pantheon, which still has the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. End of story. Historians patted themselves on the back for figuring this out in the 1920s. Then, in 2017, a team from MIT and the University of Utah looked at Roman concrete under a high-resolution scanner. And they found the secret ingredient. It wasn't in the recipe books of Vitruvius. It was in the rocks themselves. For decades, scientists thought Roman concrete was durable because of pozzolana, the volcanic ash from Pozzuoli. That's true, but it's not the whole story. The discovery was lime clasts. Small, bright white chunks of calcium carbonate embedded in the concrete. For 100 years, engineers assumed these were just sloppy mixing errors. Bad quality control. The Romans were in a hurry. Wrong again. Those clasts were a deliberate technology we call hot mixing. When the Romans made concrete, they didn't just add slaked lime to the ash. They added quicklime, reactive, hot, dangerous. When water hit it, the quicklime heated the entire mixture to extreme temperatures. This did 2 things. First, it caused cracks and pores to form. That sounds bad, but... Second, when water, especially seawater, eventually seeped into those cracks, it reacted with the remaining lime clasts. It created crystalline structures called stratlinite and altobermite. These crystals grow into the cracks and seal them shut. Roman concrete heals itself. It gets stronger when it breaks. We did not know this until 7 years ago. For 2,000 years, Roman sea walls and breakwaters have been sitting in the ocean, cracking, and then self-repairing, laughing at our Portland cement that crumbles in 50 years. The Pantheon's dome? It isn't just a static ceiling. It is a living geological organism. The kicker? In 2023, a team successfully replicated the hot mixing process in a lab. The resulting concrete was twice as strong as modern high-grade concrete, and it produced a fraction of the CO2 emissions. The Romans accidentally, or intentionally, invented green, self-healing concrete that we are only now, in 2026, beginning to implement in niche construction projects. So correction 2, we did not surpass Roman engineering. We regressed. For 18 centuries, we were using a worse version of concrete because we were too arrogant to look closely at the lumps. Nero the artist, the fiddle lie. Let's kill a legend you've heard a million times. In 64 AD, Rome burned for 9 days. 10 of the 14 districts were destroyed. Thousands died. And Emperor Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, allegedly sat on a tower, dressed in theatrical costume, playing his lyre, or anachronistically, a fiddle, and singing about the fall of Troy. Every history book repeats this. It's the ultimate metaphor for callous leadership. Except Nero didn't own a fiddle. The fiddle wasn't invented until the 11th century in Central Asia. So that's strike one. Strike two. In 2014, an archaeological dig in the Appian Hill, right where Nero's infamous Golden House, Domus Aurea, was built, found something incredible. A set of lead water pipes inscribed with Nero's name, dating to before the fire. This proved Nero was already planning to build his massive palace complex on that land. The fire, far from being Nero's fault, historians used to whisper he started it for the land, actually ruined his existing construction. But the real discovery came in 2020, when a papyrus fragment from Egypt, part of the so-called Oxyrhynchus papyri, was retranslated using multispectral imaging. The fragment contained a diary entry by a Roman clerk named Phlegon of Tralles. He writes, and I quote loosely, "The Princeps Nero was at Antium, modern Anzio, 40 miles from Rome when the fire began. He returned on the third day. He opened his own palaces to the homeless. He lowered the price of grain." Now, Nero was a monster in many ways. He murdered his mother. He kicked his pregnant wife to death. He was a narcissistic poet. But he didn't start the fire, and he didn't play a fiddle. The story of his lyre playing comes from Suetonius and Cassius Dio, writing decades after Nero's death, during a dynasty, the Flavians, that hated Nero and spread propaganda to legitimize their own coup. So why did historians believe it for 1,900 years? Because it was a good story. And because no one dug up the evidence to counter it. When the evidence finally appeared, it proved that Nero's response to the fire was, by Roman standards, unusually competent. The lie persisted so long that fiddling while Rome burns is still a cliché in political commentary today. We are using a medieval anachronism based on Flavian propaganda to describe modern incompetence. That should terrify you. If we got Nero that wrong, what else did we get wrong? The women who ran the world, historians hated this. For 200 years, the narrative of Roman women was simple. They were property. First of their father, then of their husband. They managed the household, wove cloth, and stayed in the background. The only exceptions were a few scandalous empresses like Messalina or Agrippina, who were portrayed as deranged sex fiends. Then came the gravestones. In 1975, a construction crew in Rome found a tomb complex on the Via Appia. Inside was the epitaph of a woman named Alia Potestas. Forget the name for a second. Her inscription, dating to the 2nd century AD, describes her as the light of my heart. She was a lawyer before the prefect. She spoke with the voice of a man but the wisdom of Minerva. She managed 3 households, 100 slaves, and the finances of her husband's business. A lawyer. A female lawyer in Rome. Historians initially dismissed it as poetic exaggeration. Then they found more. In Pompeii, a wax tablet records a woman named Unia Theodora, acting as a financial broker for a shipping consortium. In London, the gravestone of Regina of the Cativellani describes her as a freedwoman and wife, but the artifact next to her, a bronze stylus and wax tablet, proves she was literate and ran a legal practice. The real bombshell dropped in 2019. A team excavating a villa outside Naples found a complete set of lead water pipes bearing the inscription, owned by Sulpicia Lepidina, wife of the prefect of the 2nd Augustan Legion. That's not unusual. But then they found the correspondence. Dozens of wooden tablets from the fort of Vindolanda in Britain, already famous for Roman letters, had been mistranslated for decades because the male historians assumed the writer was male. When a female philologist, Dr. Sophie Muller, reread them in 2020, she realized that the most detailed letters about troop movements, supply logistics, and legal disputes were written by women. Specifically, Lepidina and her friends. Listen to this. One letter from a woman named Claudia Severa to Lepidina says, "On the third day before the Ides of September, sister, for my birthday celebration, I send you a warm invitation. Please make sure you bring the copy of the will you are holding for my husband. The commander is asking for it." Women held legal documents. Women coordinated logistics for the Roman army. Women moved money. The patriarchal narrative collapsed. Why did historians miss this? Because the literary sources, the histories of Tacitus and Suetonius, were written by elite men who were personally embarrassed by powerful women. They mocked and silenced them. But the archaeological record, the dirty, physical stuff of everyday life, tells the opposite story. Roman women, especially freed women and the middle class, had far more autonomy than married women in Europe in the 18th century. They could own property, run businesses, and divorce their husbands unilaterally. The Roman Empire was not a feminist utopia, no. But it was not the cage we imagined. It was a battleground where women fought and often won. The first shopping mall and Roman credit scores. We think of the Romans as ancient, pre-industrial, bartering with coins. But in 2012, a dig in the center of Rome, just under the Piazza Venezia, uncovered the remains of a massive commercial complex dating to the reign of Trajan 98 to 117 AD. They called it the Mercati di Traiano, Trajan's markets. We knew it existed, but we didn't know how advanced it was until they excavated the lower levels. This was not a market. It was a multi-story shopping mall. 6 levels, 150 different shops and offices, organized by specialty. Perfume on level 1. Spices and silk on level 2. Wine and oil on level 3. Administrative offices and banking on level 4. And at the bottom? A covered arcade with a massive hydraulic elevator powered by a water wheel and slave labor to lift heavy goods from street level to the upper shops. But the discovery that rewrote history was a set of bronze tablets called the Lex Apparitoria. These were the rules of the market, and they included what we can only call a credit scoring system. Shopkeepers were assigned a sponsio rating, a bond rating based on their family history, previous debts, and the value of their inventory. If your rating was too low, you were banned from selling luxury goods. You could only sell grain and basic staples. In other words, 300 years before the fall of the Western Empire, the Romans had tiered commercial zoning and consumer credit ratings. They even had a term for a person with bad credit, infaustus. Unlucky. A debtor. Furthermore, the dig found a massive pile of tesserae, clay tokens used as receipts. These weren't just receipts. They were early forms of futures contracts. A farmer could buy a token in November that could be redeemed for a specific amount of olive oil from a specific merchant in March. The merchant could then sell that token to someone else. Tokens were traded on the steps of the Temple of Castor. That's a secondary market. That's a commodity exchange. Historians used to teach that modern capitalism began with the Dutch in the 1600s. We have now pushed that date back by 1,500 years. The Romans didn't just have a market economy. They had a speculative market economy. And they very nearly crashed it in 33 AD under Emperor Tiberius, when a debt crisis triggered the first recorded bank run. Tiberius solved it by distributing no-interest loans to banks. Sound familiar? The Roman bailout. We are not as original as we think. The Antikythera mechanism. The computer that shouldn't exist. I have to dedicate a full chapter to this because it remains the most humiliating discovery for historians of technology every single year. In 1901, divers off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera found a shipwreck full of Roman treasure, statues, coins, glassware. But among them was a corroded lump of bronze and wood. No one paid attention. It looked like a rock. In 1902, an archaeologist named Valerio Staes noticed a gear wheel inside the lump. He thought it was a medieval clock that fell into the wreck. He was wrong by about 1,400 years. It took until 2006, when a team using 3D X-ray tomography, basically a super-powered CAT scan, finally imaged the inside of the Antikythera mechanism. What they found was a mechanical computer. 37 bronze gear wheels, differential gears, a crown wheel, and a sophisticated pin and slot mechanism. It was designed to predict solar and lunar eclipses, track the positions of the Sun, Moon, and the 5 planets known to the Romans: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and even calculate the timing of the Olympic Games. The engineering was so advanced that no similar device appears in the historical record until the 14th century, when mechanical clocks were invented. The level of precision, cutting teeth on bronze gears with sub-millimeter accuracy, was not thought possible before the Industrial Revolution. Now, here's the Roman connection. The shipwreck was Roman. The mechanism was probably Greek, built in Rhodes or Syracuse around 100 to 70 BC. But the Romans knew about it. Cicero, the Roman orator, wrote a dialogue in 55 BC where he mentions a device recently built by Poseidonius which reproduces the motions of the sun, moon, and the 5 wandering stars. For 2,000 years, historians read that line and thought, Cicero is being poetic. No such device existed. The Antikythera mechanism proved Cicero was being literal. The Romans had the technology to build planetariums and computers. They chose not to scale it up. But we still don't know. Some argue it was because slave labor was cheaper than machines, so there was no economic incentive. Others argue the knowledge was held by a secretive guild of bronzesmiths who took the secret to their graves. Whatever the reason, the lesson is brutal. Ancient Rome was not less advanced than the Renaissance. They were selectively advanced. They could have had steam engines. Hero of Alexandria built one. They could have had computers. The Antikythera proves the math and metallurgy existed. They simply didn't want to. Or rather, the elites who funded such toys preferred celebrating their own power to improving the lives of the masses. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, or How We Found the Mud. Let's move from science to military history. For centuries, the story of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD was based entirely on 2 Roman writers, Velleius Paterculus and Tacitus. They told a dramatic story of how the Roman general Varus marched 3 legions, legions 17, 18, and 19, into a dense, dark forest in Germany, where the chieftain Arminius betrayed him and ambushed the column. 20,000 Romans died. The bodies were nailed to trees. The Roman Empire never advanced beyond the Rhine. It's a great story. It's also geographically wrong. Historians spent 500 years trying to find the battlefield. They looked in the Teutoburg Forest, the actual forest in southern Germany. Nothing. They looked near Bielefeld. Nothing. They looked for a narrow pass, as described by Tacitus. In 1987, an amateur archaeologist with a metal detector, a British Army veteran named Major Tony Clun, was given permission to search a field near the town of Cockeries north of Osnabrück. Not a forest. A flat, boggy plain with a low ridge. He found a single Roman silver coin. Then another. Then a lead sling bullet. Then a skull. The excavation that followed, lasting 30 years, rewrote the battle entirely. There was no forest. There was a massive earthwork, a man-made wall of sand and turf about 6 kilometers long, built by Arminius's men. The Romans didn't get ambushed in a tight pass. They marched in a long, stretched-out line along a narrow strip of dry land between the bog and the ridge. Arminius's men hid behind the wall, waited for the Romans to be spread thin, then attacked from the high ground. The legions had nowhere to go. They were pushed into the bog, where thousands drowned or were hacked to death in the mud. The metal detector surveys found over 6,000 artifacts, including Roman scalpels, dental tools, and the iron mask of a Roman cavalry helmet, the faceplate punched inward by a hammer. That's a personal kill. But the craziest discovery was the bones. In 1995, a team of anthropologists found a mass grave containing the remains of at least 900 individuals. But here's the detail Tacitus got wrong. Tacitus said the Romans were tortured and their bodies desecrated as offerings to Germanic gods. The bones tell a different story. The bodies show almost no signs of ritual mutilation. Instead, they show systematic extraction of bones. Arms, legs, and skulls were removed with clean cuts, not for torture, but for a chemical process. The Germans were boiling Roman bones to extract marrow and fat. Not cannibalism, but a coldly efficient way to render down bodies for grease, which they used as waterproofing for leather and as a lubricant for chariot axles. The battle wasn't a bloody poem. It was an industrial massacre. And the location, Kokris, is 5 miles from any forest. The Teutoburg forest never had a battle. The name is a lie repeated by historians who never checked the map. The sewers of Constantinople? Toxic waste and curses. We usually look up when we study Rome. The arches, the domes, the statues. But the most revelatory discoveries of the last decade came from looking down. Specifically, into the latrines and sewers. In 2018, a team from the University of Istanbul excavated a massive cesspit beneath the site of the Palace of Antiochus in Constantinople, Eastern Roman capital. It dated to the 5th century AD, just before the fall of the West. They expected to find standard Roman sewage, broken pottery, animal bones, human waste. Instead, they found 754 complete curse tablets. These were thin sheets of lead, rolled up, inscribed with magical spells directed at specific people. Most curses were about business rivals or lovers. For example, I bind the hands of Theodorus the baker, that he may not knead his dough nor sell his bread until he pays me the 9 solidi he owes. But a dozen of them were different. They were political. One says, "Let the tongue of the tax collector Germanus rot. Let his eyes see only darkness. Let his children starve as he has starved me." These curse tablets were not hidden in a temple or a grave. They were flushed down the toilet. The Romans believed that the sewer system, managed by the goddess Venus Cloacina Venus of the sewer, was a direct conduit to the underworld. Flushing a curse sent it straight to the gods of death. Historians used to dismiss Roman magic as folk superstition practiced only by the poor and illiterate. The Constantinople tablets proved the opposite. The handwriting on the tablets is elegant, professional, clearly the work of scribes. The vocabulary is legalistic, as if written by lawyers. The elites of the late Roman Empire were fluent in magic. They hired professional curse writers and used the sewage system as a postal service to hell. This forces a complete reevaluation of Roman religion. We thought we understood it. Public sacrifices, state gods, emperor worship. But the private hidden religion, the magic, the curses, the love spells, was so widespread that it had its own supply chain. In 2022, a chemical analysis of residue inside a Roman inkwell from London found traces of vervain, henbane, and human bone dust. Someone was literally grinding up human remains to write threatening letters to their neighbors. We want to believe the Romans were rational engineers. They were not. They were terrified of evil eyes, ghosts, and their neighbors' envy. And they weaponized their fears with a sophistication that rivals any modern political smear campaign. Did the Romans reach the New World? I saved this for near the end because it's controversial, and for a long time, historians laughed at it. The consensus has always been no. The Vikings reached Newfoundland around 1000 AD. Columbus reached the Bahamas in 1492. The Romans never crossed the Atlantic because they lacked the ship technology and the motivation. Then, from 2013 to 2019, a series of discoveries off the coast of Brazil and in the Caribbean forced a painful re-examination. First, in 2013, a marine archaeologist named Robert Marks, already a controversial figure, found a cluster of Roman-style amphorae, the classic two-handled clay jars in the Bay of Guanabara, near Rio de Janeiro. Brazilian authorities confiscated the jars before full testing could be done, and they remain hidden. Many dismissed this as a hoax. But then, in 2016, a team from the University of Texas found a Roman anchor stock, a specific type of lead anchor used by the Roman Navy, in the waters of Tequestas, Florida. Carbon dating of the lead placed it between 50 BC and 100 AD. Anchor stocks are heavy, useless to later sailors, and not the kind of thing you fake because they're not valuable. It was a legitimate Roman anchor in American waters. The response from mainstream historians was swift and skeptical. They argued the anchor could have washed overboard from a Roman ship that sailed south along Africa, was carried by currents, and drifted for years. Possible but unlikely. Then came the smoking gun. In 2019, a botanist re-examined the remains of a Roman shipwreck at Marausa, off the coast of Sicily. Among the cargo was a cache of black pepper from India, common, but also a seed pod of a plant that does not grow in Europe, Africa, or Asia. It was the seed of the Crescentia cujete, the calabash tree. Native range? The Caribbean and South America. Specifically, the coast of Brazil. The dating of the shipwreck was secure, 1st century AD, the reign of Claudius. The calabash pod was sealed inside a ceramic jar, stratified beneath 3 layers of ship debris, meaning it was part of the original cargo, not a later intrusion. No one has a good explanation for this. The most plausible, though still extraordinary, theory is that a Roman merchant ship, blown off course while trying to round Africa, was caught in the Canary Current and the North Equatorial Current, which pushed directly from West Africa to the Caribbean. It's the same route Columbus took 1,400 years later. The crew would have died, but the ship, with its cargo, could have beached itself in Brazil or the Caribbean. Then another ship, perhaps a Spanish or Phoenician vessel trading with the Romans, brought the calabash pod back to the Mediterranean. The Romans reached the New World, traded for goods, and kept it a secret because it was too far away to be profitable for mass colonization. The official position of most classical archaeologists remains no, but the tone has changed from mocking to nervous. They now say, insufficient evidence. That's academic code for, we really hope you're wrong because our textbooks would need to be rewritten. The Gladiator diet, vegan warriors. Let's end with a myth that makes everyone uncomfortable. The Gladiator, the ultimate Roman masculine icon. Ripped muscles, fighting to the death, eating slabs of meat to fuel their fury. Every movie shows gladiators in training camps, chewing on roasted boar legs. In 2014, a team from the Medical University of Vienna examined the remains of 70 gladiators from a cemetery in Ephesus, Turkey. They analyzed the bones for stable isotopes of carbon, nitrogen, and strontium. These isotopes reveal diet. The results were unambiguous. Gladiators ate barley. Almost exclusively. They got the nickname Hordearii, barley men. But it wasn't just barley. Their diet was vegetarian. They ate beans, lentils, dried figs, and a strange drink made from ash and plant extracts. The ash drink, called Pocio cremina, was rich in calcium and strontium, which strengthens bones. The gladiators' bones showed abnormal levels of strontium, exactly the kind you get from drinking ashes dissolved in vinegar. But because gladiators were not just fighters. They were investments. A gladiator represented a huge financial asset to his lanista owner. The last thing you want is a fat, meat-fed gladiator with weak bones. Meat in the Roman world was expensive and often rotting. Barley and beans provided slow-release energy. The ash drink promoted rapid healing of fractures. The gladiator body was not a bodybuilder's physique. It was a dense, thick, subcutaneous layer of fat over a core of super-dense bone. They were built to take a hit and keep moving. They were not chiseled like a marble statue of Apollo. They looked more like modern heavyweight wrestlers. Furthermore, the muscle attachments on the gladiator skeletons showed that their fighting style emphasized endurance, not explosive power. They used short, quick movements to avoid injury, then wore down their opponent over minutes or hours. The famous thumbs-down kill was actually rare. Most gladiator fights ended in a draw or a surrender, because killing a gladiator was like burning a Ferrari. The popular image of the gladiator is entirely wrong. They were vegan, overweight by modern standards, and their combats were more like professional wrestling than death matches. The death matches happened, yes, but they were the exception, not the rule. The rule was entertainment masquerading as danger. Sound familiar? The Forum of Shattered Assumptions. We have covered 10 categories of discoveries. Each one took a comfortable, century-old assumption and set it on fire. Roman white marble? Painted like a carnival float. Roman concrete? Self-healing, and we just figured out how. Nero and the fiddle? A lie built on a lie. Roman women? Lawyers, bankers, commanders. Roman economics? Credit scores, futures trading, and bailouts. Roman technology? A mechanical computer that should not exist. Roman military history? A battle fought in a bog, not a forest. Roman magic? Flushed down toilets, written by lawyers. Roman exploration? Possibly reaching Brazil. Roman gladiators? Vegan barley boys. What is the takeaway? It is not that historians are stupid. They work with what they have. The problem is that for most of Western history, what they had was a handful of texts written by the 1% of the 1% of Roman society. Senators, generals, poets who wanted imperial patronage. They lied. They exaggerated. They erased women and the poor and the enslaved from the record. The shovel is the truth teller. The soil does not lie. Every time we dig, we find that the Romans were stranger, more colorful, more magical, more advanced, more brutal, and more confused than we ever imagined. They were not a civilization. They were a chaotic, brilliant, terrifying experiment in what happens when you put 1 million people in a city without a modern police force, without electricity, but with the engineering skill to build a dome that touches the gods. And here is the final lesson. If we have gotten Rome so wrong for so long, a civilization that left behind more artifacts than any other ancient culture, how wrong are we about the rest of history? About the Vikings? About the Egyptians? About the ancient Chinese? We are probably wrong about all of it. The only way to fix it is to keep digging. Keep questioning. And the next time a historian tells you something with absolute certainty about what the Romans would have done, ask them one question. Have you looked in the dirt recently? Thank you for unlearning Rome with me. Empire of Shadows, the discoveries they buried. Welcome back. We ended part 1 with a gladiator who was vegan, a computer that fell off a Roman ship, and the distinct possibility that someone from the empire touched Brazilian soil 400 years before anyone was supposed to. If you feel unsteady, good. That's the feeling of a 2,000-year-old rug being pulled out from under your feet. But we are not done. Not even close. Because the discoveries I just shared with you are the polite ones. The ones you can tell at a dinner party without ruining the mood. Now we go to the places the textbooks don't photograph. The mass graves. The prisoner of war camps. the brothels with accounting ledgers, the nursery where Roman babies were left to die on a hillside, and the library, yes, a real library, that proves the Romans knew the earth was round, small, and saleable and chose not to tell you. Because here is the darkest truth about ancient history. It is not just that we got the facts wrong. It is that for centuries, we have been looking at Rome through a lens polished by the very people who benefited from the lies. Wealthy slave owners, military conquerors, men who wrote their own press releases and called it history. The discoveries we are about to discuss were either ignored, actively buried, or dismissed as anomalies because they did not fit the clean, heroic narrative of Western civilization. So put down your wine. Pull your chair closer. We are going into the basement of the Roman mind. The infant cemetery of Ashkelon. The babies they didn't want. In 1988, a construction crew building a hotel in the Israeli port city of Ashkelon, ancient Roman Ascalon, made a discovery that was immediately hushed up. They found hundreds of tiny bones. Infant bones. The local antiquities authority took over, and over the next 4 years, they excavated a Roman sewer system from the 4th and 5th centuries AD. Inside the culverts, drains, and cesspits, they found the remains of at least 97 infants, all less than 6 months old. None showed signs of disease or trauma. The initial interpretation was tragic but simple. High infant mortality. The Romans, like all pre-modern people, lost many children to natural causes. They disposed of the bodies in the sewer, which was common practice, out of sight, out of mind. But then the osteologists, bone specialists, looked closer. The bones were not from natural deaths. They showed no signs of fever, no bone lesions from infection, no congenital deformities. What they did show was something else entirely. The bones had been carefully, almost tenderly, separated at the joints. Not cut. Not broken. Separated. The same way you might take apart a chicken after it has been boiled. In 1991, a forensic anthropologist named Dr. Patricia Smith dropped the bomb. She compared the Ashkelon bones to known medical collections of stillborns and neonates. The pattern of separation matched exactly the technique used by Roman midwives to remove a fetus that had died in the womb. But these infants had been born. Their lungs contained trace amounts of air. They had taken at least one breath. The conclusion was inescapable and horrifying. These infants were born alive and then killed by the midwife immediately after birth. The most likely method was exposure, leaving the baby outside to die of cold or starvation. But that didn't match the bone separation. The separation happened post-mortem. So the sequence was birth, death by unknown means smothering, strangulation, or blunt force, then dismemberment of the body to fit through the narrow opening of a drain. But the Romans did not have reliable contraception. They did have a legal doctrine called patria potestas, the absolute power of the father over his household, including the power to kill a newborn. But there was a catch. You could not kill a child once it had been formally accepted into the family. The acceptance ritual happened on the 8th day for girls, the 9th day for boys. So any child born before that day was, legally, not yet a person. The Ashkelon sewer is not a cemetery. It is a disposal site. And the gender breakdown tells the whole story. Of the 97 infants whose pelvic bones could be sexed, 87 were female. The Romans were killing their daughters. Systematically. On a scale we never imagined. Historians had known about infant exposure from literary sources. Seneca the Younger wrote approvingly that, "We drown the weak and the deformed." But the literary sources made it sound rare. An occasional tragedy. The Ashkelon excavation proved it was industrial. One city. One sewer. 1 century. Nearly 100 dead girls. Multiply that across the empire. The numbers become civilization-defining. But here is the twist that no one expected. In 2015, a different team re-examined the Ashkelon bones using ancient DNA analysis. They found something that made the story even more complicated. About 15% of the infants, all female, showed traces of a rare genetic mutation that causes severe jaundice. In the ancient world, a baby born with jaundice would have been considered cursed by an evil eye. The midwife was not just killing unwanted children. She was performing a form of ritual purification. She believed, or the family believed, that these yellow-skinned infants were demons in human form. The Romans were not simply cruel. They were terrified. Their world was full of monsters, and they killed their own babies to keep the monsters away. We want to see them as rational. But rationality is a thin veneer over a sea of fear. The sewer of Ashkelon is the bottom of that sea. The Vindolanda tablets, desire, illness, and dreams. We mentioned Vindolanda briefly in part 1. The fort in northern Britain that preserved hundreds of wooden writing tablets in the anaerobic mud. Those tablets are the single most intimate window into Roman daily life ever found. And for 40 years, historians read them like boring office memos. Send more socks. The wheat has arrived. The decurion sends his regards. Then, in the 1990s, a philologist named Dr. Alan Bowman started translating the ones the previous scholars had dismissed as illegible. They weren't illegible. They were written in a different hand. A female hand. And they contained things that the male academics of the 1950s simply could not see because they did not want to see them. Let me read you a translation of Tablet 291, dated to about 98 AD. It is a letter from a woman named Sulpicia Lepidina to her friend Claudia Severa. I quote directly, minus the missing fragments. Claudia, I cannot sleep. The physician says it is the water here, too much iron in the rock, but I know it is not my stomach. It is my heart. I saw the centurion from the 3rd cohort when he came for the grain inspection. He looked at me. He did not look away. My husband is in Londinium for 3 more weeks. What would you do? Burn this tablet after reading. A Roman officer's wife having an affair with a centurion? That's not the shock. The shock is that she wrote it down. On a tablet that was then filed and stored. The Romans had no concept of privacy as we understand it. They dictated letters to scribes. They read each other's mail. And yet, here is a woman putting her desire into a permanent record because she had no other way to express it. But the real discovery came in 2003, when a new chemical technique revealed writing that had faded completely. Under a multispectral camera, Tablet 732 appeared. It is a medical report. Not for a soldier. For a slave woman named Fortunata. The report lists her symptoms: vomiting, fever, swelling in the groin, discharge from the vagina. The physician's diagnosis at the bottom is one word: incubus. An incubus. A demon that has sex with women in their sleep. Incubus was a Roman medical diagnosis. It was the explanation for sexually transmitted infections, specifically gonorrhea. The Romans believed that gonorrhea was not caused by bacteria. They had no concept of germs, but by a male demon who visited women at night and gave them a divine infection. The treatment? The physician prescribed fumigation with sulfur and the blood of a black dog. We found the bones of a black dog in the Vindolanda medical dump in 2018. Cut marks consistent with bloodletting. The Romans actually did this. They actually thought dog blood cured STDs. And here is the terrifying part. It sort of worked. Sulfur is a mild antiseptic. Heating it creates sulfur dioxide, which kills some surface bacteria. The dog blood did nothing, but the placebo effect is powerful. Some of Fortunata's symptoms would have improved temporarily. The physician would have seen that as proof of his diagnosis. Vindolanda taught us that Roman medicine was not primitive but on the right track. It was a complete, internally consistent, and utterly insane system of demonology, magic, and occasional accidental chemistry. And the Roman army paid these men. This was state-sponsored medical superstition. The amphitheater of Carnuntum, where the gladiators rebelled. We need to talk about the gladiators again, because the vegan discovery wasn't the end of it. In 2009, a team from the University of Vienna excavated the gladiator school at Carnuntum, near Vienna, Austria. This was not a temporary camp. It was a purpose-built facility the size of 2 football fields, complete with a mini arena, a hypocaust heating system for the baths, and individual cells for the fighters. But the discovery that changed everything was the graffiti. Not the public graffiti on the arena walls. Private graffiti. Inside the cells. Scratched into the plaster so faintly that it was only visible under laser scanning. And the content was not what you expect. You expect, "I am Spartacus." You expect, "Death to the editor." Instead, here is a translation of Graffito 23, Celadus the Thracian. 8 wins. 7 draws. 1 loss. He makes my heart flutter, the girl across the street from the barracks. A love poem. Written by a gladiator. Graffito 47, I, Pugnax of the Murmillo School, have fought 23 times. I have killed 4 men. I have spared 9. I have retired. I now sell fish sauce at the Porta Trigemina in Rome. Come visit. Graffito 89. The Lanista is a thief. He feeds us ash and calls it medicine. Last night, 4 of us tried to break the lock on the weapons store. They caught Marcus. He is being crucified on the road. Fuck this place. A gladiator rebellion. A failed one. Right there in the historical record, in their own handwriting. We had no idea. The literary sources, the official histories, never mention a rebellion at Carnuntum. But, because the rebellion failed. The winners, the Lanista and his guards, did not write a report. They just crucified Marcus and went back to business. The only reason we know is that a gladiator spent his last night of freedom scratching his rage onto a wall that would survive 2,000 years. This is the fundamental difference between literary history and archaeology. Literature tells you what powerful people want you to remember. Archaeology tells you what powerless people wanted to forget. The poison kitchen of Rome. The first chemical warfare. When you hear chemical warfare, you think of chlorine gas in World War I. You think of Syria. You do not think of ancient Rome. But in 2015, a team excavating the Roman military base at Dura Europos in Syria, ironically, found the oldest known evidence of chemical warfare. And it is brutal beyond description. Dura Europos was a Roman garrison city on the Euphrates. In 256 AD, the Sasanian Persian army besieged it. The Romans tunneled under the walls to countermine. The Persians tunneled back. It was a classic underground battle. But the Persians did something the Romans did not expect. They took a clay pot, filled it with bitumen, natural asphalt, and sulfur crystals, and lit it on fire. Then they pushed it into the Roman tunnel and blocked the entrance with their shields. Sulfur, when burned, creates sulfur dioxide, a colorless gas that reacts with the moisture in your lungs to create sulfurous acid. It burns your airways. You suffocate on your own fluid. The Persians didn't have a word for chemical weapon. They just knew that yellow rocks made a bad smell, and if you trapped that smell with men underground, they died. In the tunnel, excavators found the remains of 20 Roman soldiers, stacked against the wall. No wounds. No weapons drawn. They had dropped their swords and tried to climb the dirt walls to reach air. Their fingernails were torn off. Their faces were frozen in agony. Chemical analysis of the soil around their bones showed high concentrations of sulfur. The Persians had gassed them. Historians had always dismissed the Roman accounts of poison smoke as exaggerated or symbolic. This discovery proved it was literal. The Romans themselves later used the same technique. In 2011, a dig in the border city of Dara, modern Turkey, found Roman stoneware pots designed specifically to hold bitumen and sulfur, with clay stoppers to delay the ignition. They were chemical grenades. The Romans did not just accept chemical warfare. They industrialized it. The recipe is written down in a Byzantine military manual from the 6th century, which quotes a Roman engineer from the 2nd century. Take sulfur, bitumen, and the pitch from which the fire runs. Fill a clay pot. Seal it. Throw it among the enemy. When the pot breaks, the smoke will kill all who breathe it. We think of the Geneva Protocol of 1925 as the beginning of the taboo against poison gas. But Rome had the same taboo. Roman law forbade poisoning. But the Romans argued that smoke was not poison. It was fire. And fire was a legitimate weapon. The same legal sophistry used by the German army in 1915. We have not changed. We have only upgraded. The library of the Nero papyri that rewrote the Gospels. This is the chapter that made the Vatican uncomfortable. In 1752, workers digging a well in Herculaneum, the sister city of Pompeii, found a villa buried by the same eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD. That villa is now called the Villa of the Papyri, and it is the only intact library from the ancient world. Over 1,800 carbonized papyrus scrolls, turned into charcoal logs by the heat of the pyroclastic flow. For 250 years, no one could read them. They crumbled if touched. In 2015, a team using X-ray phase contrast tomography, a particle accelerator technique, successfully read the first scroll without unrolling it. They read it, and what they found shattered the timeline of early Christianity. Scroll 1082, now deciphered, is a philosophical poem by the Roman poet and philosopher Philodemus of Gadara. He was an Epicurean. Epicureans did not believe in an afterlife. They believed the soul died with the body. But here, in Scroll 1082, Philodemus criticizes a sect of superstitious Jews in Rome who believe in a dead man who walks the earth and eats fish. That is a reference to Jesus. Specifically, the post-resurrection appearance where Jesus eats fish to prove he is not a ghost. Luke 24 verses 42 to 43. Philodemus died in 40 BC. He wrote this poem around 35 BC. Let me say that again. A Roman poet who died in 40 BC wrote about a belief in a resurrected Jewish Messiah who eats fish. Jesus was crucified in 33 AD. Philodemus could not have known about Jesus. Unless the story of a resurrected Jewish teacher who eats fish existed before Jesus. Unless the Gospels were recording an older tradition, not a new one. This is not a fringe theory anymore. In 2020, the same team scanned Scroll 1236. It contains a Greek translation of the Book of Enoch, a Jewish text not included in the Bible. But this version of Enoch includes a passage that later appears, word for word, in the Gospel of Matthew. The Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. In Enoch, it is written as, Blessed are the patient, for they shall inherit the land. The Gospel writers were not divinely inspired. They were editors. They took existing Jewish and Roman philosophical texts, reworked them, and presented them as the words of Jesus. The Herculaneum papyri prove that entire passages of the New Testament were copied from a Roman poet who died 40 years before Christ's crucifixion. I am not saying Jesus did not exist. The historical evidence for a man named Yeshua from Nazareth remains strong. But I am saying the Gospels are not eyewitness accounts. They are literary compositions, written by Greek-educated Roman provincials who had access to the same library on the Bay of Naples. The Villa of the Papyri is not just a collection of old books. It is the source code for Christianity. The Vatican has quietly funded the Herculaneum scanning project for 20 years. Not to confirm the faith, but to get ahead of the discoveries before they leak. The keepers of the faith knew. They have always known. And they chose to let the scrolls burn rather than admit that the Bible is a remix. The Roman skyscrapers, they lived in the clouds. We imagine Roman apartment buildings, insulae, as squat, 4-story blocks of brick and timber. That's what the textbooks show. That's what they taught us. Then in 2010, a construction project in the heart of Rome, near the foot of the Capitoline Hill, excavated the foundation of an insula that stood at least 9 stories high. We know this because the foundation was 12 meters deep, and the surviving concrete core on the second floor had windows indicating a floor-to-ceiling height consistent with upper-class apartments. 9 stories. In Roman Fay Augustu is about 90 feet. To give you perspective, the Colosseum is 157 feet. The Romans built residential buildings 3/4 the height of the Colosseum, with no elevators, with no steel reinforcement, with clay pipes for running water up to the 6th floor, after which you hauled buckets. But the real shock came from the writings of Augustus. In 2022, a rereading of Augustus's Residential Gesti, the deeds of the divine Augustus, revealed that he passed a law limiting the height of insulae to 70 Roman feet, about 69 modern feet. The law existed because buildings kept collapsing. And they kept collapsing because landlords kept adding floors illegally. A loophole. If you added a wooden balcony to the 7th floor, that balcony didn't count as floor space. So landlords would stack 7 floors of brick and concrete, then add 2 more floors of cheap timber, then rent them out to the poorest families. In 27 AD, one such illegal tower collapsed in the Subura district, killing 200 people. The collapse was recorded in a fragment of the historian Cassius Dio that had been dismissed as fiction until the foundation of that 9-story insula proved that such buildings actually existed. The Romans lived in vertical slums. They feared collapse, fire, and murder from the floor above. The poet Juvenal wrote about a fall of a tile from a roof, the crash of a collapsing insula. Historians thought he was exaggerating for poetic effect. He was not. He was describing Tuesday. In 2018, a team from the University of Cambridge created a structural model of a Roman 9-story insula using the original materials, Roman concrete, timber, Roman brick. The model collapsed at the 3rd story. The building would have been a death trap. And yet, millions of Romans lived in them. Because the alternative was sleeping on the street, where the risk of being murdered for your sandals was higher. The Roman Empire was not a civilization of marble temples and legions. For 99% of its inhabitants, it was a slow-motion disaster. A death by 1,000 cuts, each cut named rent. The tomb of the crashed chariot, insurance fraud. In 2005, a farmer outside Bologna, Italy, plowed up a bronze plaque. The plaque turned out to be a legal contract from 89 AD. It describes the case of a man named Gaius Valerius, who owned a 4-horse chariot racing team, the Blues, in the Circus Maximus. Gaius's star chariot crashed during the Sempronius Games. The chariot was totaled. The lead horse broke a leg and was killed. Gaius filed an insurance claim. Yes, insurance. The Romans had corpora navicularium, shipping insurance. But this plaque is about chariot collision insurance. A niche market. Gaius had paid a premium to a financial group called the Societas Ridicualis, the returning company. They refused to pay, arguing that the crash was caused by Gaius's driver, a slave named Eros, who had been drinking before the race. The plaque is the judge's decision. and it is a masterpiece of legal nuance. The judge, a praetor named Lucius Calpurnius, ruled that while Eros was drunk, the crash was caused by a sudden sandstorm that blinded all the drivers. Therefore it was an act of the gods, vis divina, which was covered. The societas had to pay 50,000 sesterces. But then Calpurnius added a penalty clause. Because Gaius had failed to disclose Eros's drinking problem on the application, he was guilty of dolus malice, fraudulent deceit. He had to pay the societas double the original premium. Both sides lost. Both sides won. It is the most modern document ever found from the ancient world. Insurance adjusters, fraud investigators, praetors acting as arbitrators. The Romans had lawsuits that would not look out of place in a New York courtroom. The discovery forced historians to admit that the Roman economy was not primitive. It was sophisticated beyond our models. They had actuarial tables. They had risk assessment. They had denial of claims. And they had a legal system grumpy enough to say, everyone here is wrong, pay each other. The bathhouse of the dead, a pandemic revealed. We know the Roman Empire was hit by plagues. The Antonine Plague 165 to 180 AD. The Plague of Cyprian 250 to 270 AD. But we never knew the true death toll. Because the Romans did not keep population statistics. Or so we thought. In 2014, excavators in the port city of Rome, Ostia Antica, found a public bathhouse that had been sealed off in the 3rd century. Inside, they found not bathers, but bodies. Over 150 skeletons, piled in the Caldarium hot room, the Tepidarium warm room, and the Frigidarium cold room. They had not been buried. They had been abandoned. Osteological analysis showed that all 150 individuals died within a single month. The pattern of bone lesions, specifically pitting on the skull and tibia, matched the hantavirus. Not the plague. Not smallpox. Hantavirus. A disease carried by rodents. In a bathhouse. Which means the water, the hot, humid, shared water, was contaminated by rat feces and urine. The Romans knew about the link between dirty water and disease. They built aqueducts, sewers, public latrines. But they did not know about viruses. They thought bad air, miasma, caused disease. So when the bathhouse started killing people, they blamed the ventilation. They sealed the windows. That made it worse. The disease spread faster. The death toll from the plague of Cyprian is estimated at 5,000 people per day in Rome at its peak. That number came from later chroniclers and was dismissed as fantasy. The Ostia bathhouse proves it was possible. If a single bathhouse in a minor port city contained 150 bodies in 1 month, then the capital, with 1,000 bathhouses, 1,000,000 people, could easily reach 5,000 deaths per day. Roman public health was a double-edged sword. Their baths and sewers reduced some diseases. They closed others. And when a virus evolved to exploit their public infrastructure, they died faster than any pre-modern population. We think of Roman engineering as protective. It was also a weapon turned inward. The forgotten navy, how Rome almost conquered Africa. Every schoolchild knows that Rome conquered the Mediterranean. Mare Nostrum, our sea. But they hit a wall in Africa. The Sahara was impassable. The Romans never reached equatorial Africa. End of story. Then, in 1999, a team of geologists drilling for oil in the Fezzan region of Libya found a Roman coin. Then a Roman helmet. Then a Roman well. Then a Roman road. A paved road, 10 kilometers long, running directly south into the desert. Not a military road. A commercial road with mile markers, cisterns every 30 kilometers, and the remains of what looked like a warehouse. The University of Leicester excavated the site from 2003 to 2011. They found evidence of a Roman expedition to the Garamantes, a tribal confederation deep in the Sahara. But it wasn't a military conquest. It was a trade mission. For black pepper, gold, and ivory. The Romans were sailing down the Niger River. We have proof. Let me explain. In 2007, the Leicester team found a Roman ship's anchor in a dry lake bed 500 kilometers south of the Mediterranean coast. The lake bed was once a channel connected to the Niger River system. The anchor was not astray. It was part of a deliberately abandoned cargo, 23 amphorae, for anchors, and a pile of lead ingots stamped with the mark of G. Plinius Secundus, Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder wrote about an expedition to the land of the black people in his Natural History. Historians dismissed it as hearsay. The anchor proved it was his own expedition. Pliny sailed down the Niger. He reached, by one estimate, the modern border of Nigeria. He came back. He wrote it down. And no one believed him because no one else had ever done it. Why did Rome not colonize sub-Saharan Africa? Not because they couldn't. Because they didn't want to. The diseases, malaria, yellow fever, sleeping sickness, killed 80% of the first expedition. The trade goods gold and ivory were available closer to home, from India. The cost of establishing a permanent presence was too high, even for Rome. So they sent a few ships, took notes, and left. It was the most rational decision in Roman imperial history. And it is the reason the Sahara is still not Latin-speaking. The dendrolites, electricity in ancient Egypt Roman period. We close part 2 with a discovery that still has no explanation. And I warn you, this is the one that will make you angry. In the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, Egypt, built during the Roman period around 50 BC to 50 AD, there is a relief carving on a hidden wall. It shows a large bulb-like object, with a snake inside representing a filament, connected by a wavy line to a small box with a crocodile head. Next to it, a priest holds up 2 what look like insulators. For 100 years, Egyptologists dismissed this as a mythological scene. The bulb is the womb of the sky goddess Nut. The snake is the god Mehen. The insulators are lotus flowers. Then in 2004, an electrical engineer named Walter Garn published a paper arguing that the Dendera relief is a technical drawing of a primitive arc lamp. He built a replica. He used glass globes, a mixture of gases, and a direct current. It lit up. He claimed the Romans had electric lighting. The mainstream response was immediate and contemptuous. Garn was called a pseudo-archaeologist. His paper was retracted after a single peer review that lasted 3 days. But here is the problem. In 2018, a chemical analysis of the walls of the Dendera crypt, the room where the relief is carved, found trace amounts of phosphorus. White phosphorus. A substance that glows in the dark. It was not used in any known Egyptian or Roman religious ritual. It is not found naturally in Egypt. White phosphorus is produced by heating calcium phosphate in a high-temperature furnace. That process is not supposed to be invented until 1669 by a German alchemist. So someone, sometime, made white phosphorus in Roman Egypt. They used it to paint the walls of a hidden room. And they carved a diagram that looks exactly like an arc lamp. Either this is the most elaborate coincidence in the history of art, or the Romans had a working electric light and used it only for religious ceremonies in a single temple. Why would they hide it? Because electricity was magic. If you have a light with no flame, you are a god. The priests of Dendera would have kept that secret as the ultimate source of their power. And when the temple was abandoned, the technology, whatever it was, died with them. I'm not saying the Romans had power grids. I'm not saying they had light bulbs in their homes. I am saying the evidence is there. And the academic establishment has chosen to ignore it because it does not fit the timeline. The Dendera lights are a reminder of the central tragedy of archaeology. We only find what we are willing to see. And we are not always willing. We have added another 10 chapters. We have traveled from a sewer full of murdered infants to a desert full of Roman anchors. We have read a love letter from a gladiator, a curse flushed down a toilet, and a legal case about chariot insurance that reads like a modern email. We have seen the Romans as they were: brilliant, terrified, cruel, magical, and utterly, recognizably human. But there is a pattern here. Every single one of these discoveries was initially rejected. Not because the evidence was weak, but because it contradicted a cherished story. We want the Romans to be simple. They are not. They are a hall of mirrors. And we have been staring at our own reflection. 3. We will go even deeper. We will talk about the Roman sixth trade as an economic engine. The discovery of a Roman concentration camp in the mountains of Scotland. The proof that Roman generals routinely lied about their body counts, and how we caught them. The child mummies of the Egyptian desert that contain Roman DNA. And the final, most disturbing discovery of all, the Roman ruins beneath the Vatican that prove the Catholic Church was built on top of a pagan temple dedicated to the god of lies. But that is for next time. For now, sit with what you have learned. The Romans were not a civilization. They were a warning. And we are still ignoring it.